Welcome to A Pair of Bookends, the book club you can carry anywhere. We are your hosts and hopefully your new bookish pals. I'm Hannah MacDonald.
And I'm Lydia Clare. Hello and welcome to our debut Spotlight series, where we shine a light on the freshest authors and their work. Today we have the pleasure of shining the spotlight on Rabbit Hole, a dazzling debut exploring the dark side of true crime fandom and the blurry lines of female friendship. Rabbit Hole follows Teddy as she reels from her father's suicide and begins an obsession with solving her older sister's cold case disappearance.
Kate Brody is a writer based in LA. She received her MFA from NYU and her work has featured in LitHub, The Rumpus, Noema and The Literary Review, among other publications. Her debut novel, Rabbit Hole, will be published by Bloomsbury in the UK and Soho Crime in the US, and actually it's out in the UK today, so go buy your copy. We are thrilled to have Kate with us to chat about her incredible book. Welcome to A Pair of Bookends.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
No, thank you so much for coming on. I'm really excited, and I've actually read your book twice now, and I loved it even more the second time, which just goes to show how amazing it is.
Wow, thank you.
I've not read it twice, but I also.
It's not a competition, Lydia. Don't worry.
Come on, don't show me up in front of the guests. But we always start our podcast by asking our favorite question, which is, what are you currently reading?
So I just finished Lindsay Hunter's Hot Springs Drive, which I think maybe just came out in the UK. It was out here in, I think, November. And I feel like it's sort of in the same family as Rabbit Hole, like in that domestic thriller space, and follows these two women who are neighbors until one of them is murdered by someone, involved in one of the families. And it's just incredibly written. Like, the sentences are beautiful, and Lindsay Hunter is able to explore so much of these families in such a short period. We hear from the sons and the husbands. I just thought it was incredible. So I just finished that, and then I'm starting on Book of Ein right now, which is Lexi Freiman, and is very funny so far. It's like a canceled writer who moves from New York to LA and looks for spiritual salvation in the works of Ayn Rand.
I'm sold. Yes. Tell me anything else, I'm sold. I love that. I've not heard of either of those, so I'm really excited I'm going to add those to my list straight away.
Definitely adding them to our list.
100%. So this episode is part of our debut Spotlight series, Kate, we like to ask authors what their experience has been like in having their debut published. So could you tell us a bit more about what this experience has been like for you?
Yeah, it's very surreal right now because the book came out almost 2 weeks ago in the US. So the publication timeline is so long. I mean, we sold the book almost 2 years ago. So after we finished edits and did all the, copy editing and cover design and all of that, I've still been kind of done with it for almost a year and a half. So it's very weird. Like, you don't think about this work for a while. Everyone else is just kind of working on it. And then the publicity ramps up. All of a sudden it starts to feel real again. And then it comes out and it's very real. And you kind of felt like maybe it was never going to come out because such a huge amount of time has passed. So it has been very cool. It's a whirlwind. I mean, the publicity part of it is, I think, doesn't really dovetail with like a lot of writing skills. So it's been a sort of separate learning experience to figure out how to promote the book and connect with readers. But it's been very positive. I think I'm lucky to have a great team in the UK and a great team here. And yeah, I mean, it's exhausting, but I'm trying not to complain. I very much remember being on the side of being at these readings and listening to writers complain about being tired and thinking like champagne problems. So
I love that. No, I completely get that, and me and Lydia have said on the podcast before, like we're both actors, so we don't enjoy listening to actors that have made it talking about how difficult it is. But I have spoken to a lot of writers that have said that they obviously love writing and they really enjoy the process of writing a book, as difficult as it can be sometimes. But it's the publicity is just something that's that's not what they signed up for. Like,
Yeah.
they don't want to have to do that part. They just want to kind of stay in the room that they write in, write the book, let it go out into the world, and just have no more to do with it.
Yeah, no, I get that. I kind of feel like my part is done. Like I wrote the book.
Yeah.
People will tag you in their reviews too. So you're kind of just minding your own business, and all of a sudden you're confronted with somebody's thoughts about the book. Which, that's great for them. Like they should definitely express those thoughts. I don't know that I need to be that intimately involved in it. I'm trying to kind of insulate myself from even the really positive feedback can be a little uncomfortable. Like a former boss of mine was texting me about the book the other day, and like trying to get into like the nitty gritty of like the sex scenes, and I was just like, I don't want to talk about this with you at all. Like I feel like you've seen me naked now, and I just think you should talk about this with somebody else.
Well, I'm really sorry that we're probably going to be just as
No, that's
insufferable.
fine.
We're going to be just as bad. I do have to
Come
ask.
onto a podcast. I'm like, I don't want to talk about it.
I don't want to talk.
All good stuff, we promise.
Well, you've had your opportunity to talk about other books that you've read, so now it's time to talk about yours. It's only fair. I also need to ask, because it's a debut novel, how does a debut novelist get an endorsement from Mila Kunis?
Yes. So actually, I taught her kid. I'm a teacher, so I taught her kids.
Oh my
And I was
gosh.
teaching them when I sold the book to Bloomsbury. So, and we actually sold it in the UK first, which is kind of unusual.
Wow.
So that was my first sale, which is such a big morning. I was like on my way to work. My husband and I worked together, so he was driving, and I got a call from my agent saying like it's going to be a real book. We sold it to Bloomsbury, and it was like 15 minutes before her kids showed up. So I was kind of overwhelmed. And then they were the first ones in, and she was like, "What's going on with you?" And I was like, "I sold my book," which was very cool. And then she was very gracious. She was like, "Oh, can I read it?" She's a big reader. So yeah, if Mila Kunis asks you to read your book,
There you go.
Yeah, the next day. I was like at Staples. And she took it on their spring break vacation, and she read it and was like gracious enough to give me a blurb. So it was very nice of her.
Incredible.
cool.
Yeah, very cool. I don't think I would never shut up about that if I was you. So
Very LA.
I'd literally open every conversation.
yeah.
No.
Would you be interested in reading my book? Highlighting the.
I love it. I love it. So, talking about the book, can we get into deep diving into this absolutely brilliant book? Honestly, I loved every second of it. It's riveting, it's tense, it's dramatic, and it's such a brilliant book that I feel like you have to just kind of like set aside time so you can devour it,
Yeah.
because you have to just like once you've started it, you're not going to be able to get it out your head. You have to know what happens. And it truly is a brilliant experience. And Hannah's done it twice, so it goes to show you just how good
Even
it
better
is.
the second time. Would recommend.
Yeah. Oh, well, I'm gonna have to now, aren't I? I'll read it 3 times. I'll beat you. But yeah, so one of the things that I found really interesting about the book was kind of how much the internet and chat forums and kind of like the Reddit culture is encapsulated a lot in Teddy's journey throughout. Why did you want Teddy, who's the main character, I should add, why did you want her world to be so like online?
I think so. I wrote a book before Rabbit Hole that kind of failed, and well, I still love it, but it failed to find an agent, and it wasn't a super plot heavy book. And also, I set it in like the 80s and 90s. I think literally as a way of avoiding cell phones, because they force you to write a lot differently. The way we communicate now is so different and really heavily text-based, which you can incorporate pretty seamlessly into a novel, texting and email and things like that. But I had seen it go wrong, I guess. I'd seen people do it in a way that it didn't ring true. And it's kind of a pet peeve of mine. I think because we spend so much time online, when we see a false version that doesn't sound right, we're so tuned into that. But then with this book, when I started writing it, I felt like it was kind of a cop out to keep like changing the timeline just to avoid that. And I think with this story, if you are like now going to investigate any kind of cold case disappearance, that is going to involve a huge amount of internet research. That's just kind of how we do everything now. And in Teddy's case, she's also so isolated. Like, I think she is, because of Angie's disappearance, she's kind of frozen in time from, Angie disappeared when she was a teenager. In the intervening years, she has not moved out of her parents' house. She's back teaching at the school she went to high school. So she doesn't have like a really robust life outside of her house and her family, which has all of that has kind of deteriorated as well. So that kind of character, I think, also would seek refuge in the internet. And the people that she's encountering there are sort of strangely just like her in that they're also kind of socially isolated. And that's, I think, what, for better and worse, the internet is a home for people like that. And it can be a place where you build community in earnest, but can also be a place that allows these kind of like unhealthy obsessions to fester.
Absolutely. And I think that's really well put. And I really enjoyed is maybe the wrong word, but I love the way that, like, at one point Teddy is obsessively checking her emails, her phone, her DMs, like obsessively. And I have been at that point, and I'm sure a lot of us have, where we've sent a message and gone, well, they've read it. They've read it. Like, why have we not got a reply? And have sat there like refresh. And I think that, Teddy's personality, I feel like she's sort of predisposed to being that type of person, kind of being obsessive in nature. I feel like something like the internet is so easy for her to just kind of fall into this trap of like, now I can't get out of this cycle of checking and posting and checking and posting. And I think that you write it really well. How difficult was it to get that kind of balance of like how much to put her in the online world and to keep her in reality?
I think in edits, we upped the amount of like Reddit and the internet that was in the book. The feedback we were getting was kind of mixed. It was almost a generational divide. Like, older readers just really sometimes did not respond at all to that material, but a lot of younger readers who do spend a lot of time like on our phones and things like that really liked it. And a lot of that feedback was like more Reddit, more more internet, even like more of the kind of old school MySpace AIM stuff. So we added a lot in, and I think that helps too with the sense that she is becoming like increasingly obsessed. And I think Teddy is like my dark doppelganger in a way. Like, I identify with that a lot. I was off social media for like 10 years because I just know myself, and I know if I dip my toe in, I fixate. And even now, like, I'm back on for the book stuff, and I feel like a junkie. Like, I feel like addicted to my phone. And I cannot wait until, I'm giving it like 2 more months, and then I'm gonna take a big step back from all of this. But yeah, I think striking that balance was like largely just kind of feeling out what the text could support and making sure that there was a sense that she was becoming like more and more enmeshed in this world.
I loved Teddy. I thought she was such a great character. And I think what I love most about her is how like messy and complex that she was. And you saying that she's like your dark doppelganger. I love that, because I felt very attracted to the fact that she was like that. And I think more and more, we've said this on the podcast before, but more and more we've seen these types of female characters being written by female authors, and I don't feel like you shied away from those parts of her. She's very complex, she's very flawed and chaotic, and some might say unhinged. but I really enjoyed reading that. And I wanted to ask, like, what do you think attracts us to these types of characters?
I think a lot of contemporary writers, I'll include myself in this, were very inspired by like when Tessa Moshfegh kind of like blazed onto the scene with these like really messy characters. Because it felt so permission giving. Like, I remember reading those books and thinking, okay, so like there's no kind of upper limit to like how gross or like gritty or uncomfortable you can make it. And especially with a first person narrative like this one, you're in Teddy's head. So I think if we're being honest with ourselves, we do have a lot of very unpleasant, subversive, like strange thoughts. And a lot of what Teddy does is very unhinged. But a lot of what she's kind of thinking and ruminating on, I don't think is that far from the norm. Like, I think really, it's difficult to read. We're not used to like reading very frank first person accounts of people's thoughts. But I like the dark doppelganger thing. Like, there was a moment in my 20s where I felt like things were just out of control. And it did feel like there were two possible paths. And it was like I could either get it together, which I did, thankfully, or like things could kind of spin out. And the stuff that happens to her, like some of the scenes in the book, they felt very possible to me. Like they felt within reach. I think when your life is kind of out of control like that, you have a sense that you're always kind of like on the edge of the abyss. So some of those scenes, like there's a scene where she's kind of like drinking too much at a school dance, and like the cringe of that scene, like I felt it writing it because it felt so like a possible alternate universe, you know, like I could imagine making those kind of bad decisions that would lead to that place. So there's something really cathartic about just like going for it with a character, like, okay, let's see what would happen if I just absolutely took the rails off. Or, you know, but there's also something that is like, it hurts a little bit to look at because it feels close to home.
I think it's so funny that you mentioned that moment at the school dance because obviously I've read it twice. So, like, the second time, I obviously knew that was coming up. But as it was approaching, I was like, oh God, here we go, here we go, here we go. It's like, I can't. And I wanted to kind of close the book because it really makes your skin crawl. I was like, oh no. It's so embarrassing. And it's, you know, it's just when the other teacher like taps her on the shoulder and she doesn't realize like how long they've been stood there like that. And it's like a different song's on. So they've been there quite a while, and it gets more and more like cringy the more you read.
Yeah.
So thank you for getting under my skin like that.
Yeah. And that the tap on the shoulder, like that kind of kindness in those, it's like the worst, you know? You almost wish somebody would just be like, get it together. Like they're being so gentle and you're acting like such an animal. And I had a lot of fun writing those. But yeah, at my New York launch, some of my former students came out and they were like, we're so excited to read the book. And I was like, don't read into any of this. Not based on true story.
Oh my God, I love that. I think as well what you were saying about a lot of these things that we might call like chaotic or unhinged or whatever, like they are like, just because they're being written in this frank way, it is reality, isn't it? Like, and what you were saying about, you know, when you were in your early 20s and how you kind of perceived yourself, like I do stuff sometimes. I was watching this TikTok the other day and it was like when you find yourself doing like weird things in the house and then you like come out of it and you're like, what was that? Like, why am I doing that? And I feel like I have so many moments like that, but I think growing up I watched so many films or like read books and things, and it was like these romanticized like ideals of people, and it just wasn't truth. So I think like now that people are writing these really frank and honest portrayals of what we're actually like as human beings, we're calling it chaotic and unhinged, but actually it's just reality. Like we are all just this weird.
No, I think that's fair. I mean, there's a moment in the book where Teddy's kind of like, if my mom could see what I do when I'm alone. And I don't think she's thinking of anything like particular, just the kind of way that you are a strange animal when you're by yourself. And now I have kids. So my oldest is 5, my youngest is 2. And it is funny with kids because you really get so close to that. Like they don't have any shame. The shame is, I think, what we feel in the text is like that layered with the shame. But yeah, sometimes I'm like, oh, we just have these like 2 raccoons who live in the house, you know, they like are basically feral.
Yeah, I have a pair of raccoons myself, and I think that's a
They are
perfect
feral. They are very feral.
Yeah, feral. Yeah. I'm like wild, but I just think my life is always chaotic and unhinged, and I've never tried to hide it. And maybe like the opposite of normal, that you know, usually people try and cover up the weirdness, whereas I've embraced it too much. There is a line I have crossed. Not sure I can go back, but you know, whatever. But thank you for writing a novel that does embrace the chaos. One of the other things that I really enjoyed about the book, on a more serious note, was the mystery of the disappearance of Teddy's sister Angie. And we follow Teddy as she attempts to try and solve this mystery, and she invests so much time and energy into trying to solve the case that she kind of starts to lose her own sense of identity, if she ever really had one in the first place. And it's such a fascinating way of kind of showing her road to self-destruction, shall we say. What was it like kind of plotting and creating that kind of curve that she goes on in the book?
So yeah, the plot stuff, I think that was like really the work of editing for me, was making sure. I've never written a mystery or a thriller, or however people want to categorize the part of the book. And so it's tough to do, because like it has to be surprising to you at least once, right? For it to be surprising to the reader. But then after a while, you're not surprised by it. So you can't really tell where the suspense is in the book. And so there was a lot of like mechanical work went into shaping that kind of investigation. And Teddy's spiraling, I guess, was easier to write. Like as that's happening and Teddy's sort of spinning out, that all made sense to me. I think just as part of her grief process, like there's this like one kind of grief that they're all experiencing around Angie's loss, because there's been no closure, and at some point they just kind of had to stop hoping. And then that's kind of contrasted with the event right on page 1, which is her father's suicide, which requires this kind of immediate response that she's really not ready to have. So I think in some ways, I mean, I thought a lot about like, what is she looking for? Like, does she actually want, or like think she's going to find Angie? Like, what does she think is going to happen here? But I think in some ways it's just about not letting go. Like if she let go of the investigation, she'd not only be letting go of Angie, but she'd also be letting go of like her last tie to her dad. So it's this way of sort of forestalling grief, and instead, just muting it into this like other kind of experience, this obsession. And that also, I think that rang true for like my experience of grief, which is you just really can't process it often, like at first. So the fact that she would throw herself into this other thing and try to kind of just have this other experience, and that would be ill-advised and kind of this slippery thing, that sort of made sense. But yeah, the plotting of it was definitely tricky. I honestly, we added and took out so many different things and like played around with so many different ideas that I'm not totally sure what made it into the final version. Like I think I know, but I'll revisit it one of these days and like
ask Hannah. Hannah's ready to
oh,
No. I want to talk a bit more about grief. Actually, I know we're laughing, but it's not funny.
Listen, if you can't laugh about grief.
Well, you are the queen of laughing at grief.
I'm queen of taking the grief word and making it fun. I'm gonna get that on a t-shirt.
I think you should. I really do. Kate, you said in an interview with Writer's Digest that you knew you wanted to, this has gone really formal all of a sudden. This is not the vibe of the podcast to do.
I was like, hang on.
We don't do formal, so that was weird. I'm just trying to get the quote directly so that I don't butcher it.
Okay. let you do the quote, but then
okay, thank you. That's it. Okay, so you did say in an interview with Writer's Digest, as far as I'm aware, that you knew you wanted to write about grief and sisterhood, and we've just been talking about grief then, and you mentioned like your own experience with grief, and grief is obviously such a universal experience, but I think it's also something that's very like specific and individual at the same time, if that makes sense. How did you kind of figure out the portrayal of grief that you wanted to represent on the page, and was it difficult to write that?
Yeah, I think I had, my dad died, and then that I felt like I didn't really process that particularly well. And then around the same time, my mom was just really in the throes of addiction, and that went on for so many years. And she got so sick that it felt almost like the disappearance to me, in the sense that we just kind of, my sisters and I were kind of constantly saying to each other, like, isn't this so weird? Like we had this experience with Dad where he died, and now it feels like we're in this protracted thing with her where it feels like this death that's just not happening, like you almost, there'd be like a relief in it because you're waiting, every time the phone rings, you think, oh, this is it. And so I think those two experiences kind of informed the book and then got obviously changed into the story. But yeah, that felt like the origin of it, like kind of living in that space. And then the sisterhood part, I mean, I love writing about. I think fictionally, I mean, I have two sisters, but it's such an interesting relationship because they're not your friends. You're totally stuck with them. Like I was talking to Nishita Parekh, who has a book coming out this month, and she has these two characters in her book who are sisters. And she said initially they were friends, and then the note was to change them to sisters because it was too toxic a friendship, which made so much sense to me because it's like, oh, how can I fix this? They're sisters. And then they have to be together. And her book is a locked room mystery. So I said to her, it's so interesting, like it kind of adds to that claustrophobia because sisterhood is its own kind of like locked room. You are just like, you are in it. For the first part of your life, it is almost literally a locked room. Like you are stuck in the house with these people. And I think for Teddy and Angie, that's true. Like they are the kind of sisters who cannot understand how they were born to the same parents, and they're like stuck living under the same roof. Teddy is this kind of, goody-goody. Angie is the black sheep. And yet when she's gone, there's also this sort of phantom limb thing that Teddy has where she feels her there. And the promise of Angie, like when she's cleaning up all of the mess Mark left behind and taking care of her mom, and she thinks, like, this was never supposed to be my job to do this by myself. Because whatever their disagreements were, that's kind of the promise of sibling, is that you're in it for life. Like these people share your history. So that was, I think, my interest in sisters is sort of perennial. I just love that. I think you can stretch that relationship so far on the page in so many different directions. And then with Mickey, who's kind of Angie's doppelganger, her and Teddy are both searching for something like that, but it's so hard to replicate. Like it is very hard to, even when you have friends who are like a sister, like they're just not. Like at the end of the day, you can have a blowout fight and never see that person again. So I think I wanted to play with that too, with Mickey being like a somewhat uncanny version of Angie, that relationship would also be a kind of uncanny sisterhood that's not quite at peace.
Yeah, I think reading about sister dynamics is one of my favorite things to read. And I think you did it so well in managing to represent that relationship, even though Angie's no longer there. And I think that's, that must have been quite difficult to do, but you somehow found a rhythm with it and it worked really well. And I also love that you mentioned, I think you said your friend is an author and is writing this book. And I love that their note was that it was too toxic a friendship. So it had to be changed to sisters, because I feel like sisters are like toxic friends to each other.
Yeah.
And I'm the oldest of four, so it's a joy always to think. What, sorry?
Right, all girls?
All girls, yeah. So you can imagine the chaos of that.
Have you read Coco Mellors' new book that's coming out yet?
Not yet. I'm so desperate to read it. So desperate.
We were in a writing group briefly in LA, but we overlapped at NYU. So it's been fun, like following her career because she's so incredible.
Gosh. Yeah. I mean, is it Fourth Estate that are publishing Blue Sisters? Yeah. If Fourth Estate are listening, we're more than open to proofs. Let me tell you that. I really, really want to read that. Yeah, it sounds so good. And yeah, I think you portrayed the sister dynamic just so well, and I really enjoyed it. And that's all I've got to say on that. Thanks so much.
No, you briefly touched on Mickey, the amateur sleuth, who kind of oozes charm and charisma, and then starts to kind of, the veneer of that kind of starts to come away a little bit, and maybe she's not quite as fun and exciting as she initially seems to Teddy. They do develop a close bond that's akin to sistership, but I would say not quite right. There's something, like you said, something off about their dynamic that I still can't put my finger on what it kind of was at that point, but it's such an interesting relationship, and their dynamic is very chaotic at times. Did you enjoy writing the character Mickey? She was my favourite character.
That does not
Obviously,
surprise me.
right? Of course. But did you enjoy writing her as much as I enjoyed reading her?
I did. I had a lot of fun writing. I mean, she was kind of, I wanted her to be almost like a so much of the book is filtered through Teddy's perspective. So I think there is this question of reliability too. Teddy immediately is like, oh, she's like a dead ringer for Angie. None of the other characters in the book like really comment on that. So I think it's kind of an open question of whether Teddy's just projecting that onto her. But there is a way in which she's this sort of fantasy of Teddy's in the beginning of the book. Like she is a way for her to spend time with Angie, like get Angie back. She looks like Angie. She has that kind of like punk rock aesthetic that Angie wanted and didn't quite achieve. She's like kind of the newer version of Angie. But yeah, I think as the book goes on, and I think this happens a lot with female friendships too, where you meet somebody and immediately like you're like, they're perfect. Like if I could just be them, if I could consume them, if I could have their body. And so you're getting close to them in a way it's almost like you're trying to take something. And then inevitably, the closer you get to someone and the more time you spend with them, you start to see that they're a person. They're just like a normal person. They're damaged in a bunch of different ways that you may or may not be damaged. They have their own baggage. So when she first appears and she's like this fantasy character with no background, she's very appealing and sexy and really fun to write. And she has like these kind of great lines. She says all the things that like you'd think about saying after you left, and then like writing her into essentially someone who is just like a damaged child was, I think, very fulfilling in a way, because it was like taking this character who I think similar to Teddy's half brother, who had been almost more idea than person. And the important thing for Teddy to understand is that like everyone else is also a real person. Everyone else is also living a real life. Like she is not here to serve your ends. And so thinking about, what Mickey's background is and kind of having information that Teddy didn't have, that was kind of fun, and thinking about how to like deploy that.
I thought she was great. She's such a great character, and I really enjoyed, the reveals that we got about her and her life throughout. And as much as she was enjoyable, I also sometimes was like, go away. Like, why do you keep popping up? Like when she turns up at the dinner, I was like, why are you here? Stop it.
Hang on. Is this how you feel about me when I just rock up?
Yes. Thank God I finally had an opportunity to say it.
Yeah, that is very like, I think also I was teaching a lot of Gothic literature at the time, and that's kind of where I knew I wanted this idea of like doppelgangers to come into the book. But I think that does feature in a lot of horror and in a lot of Gothic literature, where you have a character who their like just keenness is off-putting. Like you're like, what is your end game here? Like, what do you want? And with Mickey, the wanting, her like yearning to be part of this family is so unsettling, because they are the last family that anyone would want to be a part of. So it is like, what is your problem? Like, why are you so interested in being like sleeping in this house and being at dinner? And I think just that eagerness makes her almost like a horror character.
I also know that is it Naomi Klein that's written the book about doppelgangers as well? And I thought that was a novel, and apparently it's not. It's non-fiction. So I was very disappointed. It's a what, sorry?
It's all about the internet. It's actually like really great.
Yeah,
read.
I really want to. Have you read it?
Yeah.
Oh, I really want to read it. What is it about? Can you tell me? Just because I'm curious.
So it was born out of
This is pure laziness.
I'm just here to do my book review.
Sorry.
She kept getting mixed up with Naomi Wolf, who's a whack job, and he was like, looking into like, why do people keep confusing me with Naomi Wolf? And she said she started to get kind of obsessed with Naomi Wolf because she's like, I have to keep tabs on this woman because everyone thinks she's me. And I think that idea of, the like horror of a doppelganger in classic literature is this idea that someone who is not you is kind of walking around passing for you in the world. And that happens on the internet all the time. So she kind of explores that and then thinks about the way in which like the internet creates these like mirror worlds in general, and that we're all kind of positioning ourselves in opposition to like a doppelganger, or like creating these other selves, these like avatars who like roam the world online. So yeah, it was very relevant to me. And I really enjoyed it.
I'm not supposed to be buying any more books, but you've sold 4 to me in this episode, so this is this is a problem. We can't ask you for recommendations at the end. That is it. You're at your limit now, Kate. Sorry. Now we've kind of briefly touched on it. I'm getting the book now, it's getting serious. There are so many moments in the book that I loved and folded down the pages of, which Lydia will hate, and I did my little square around the quote that I wanted because it was she wants me to tab everything and I refuse to.
It's just so easy. It's just get a tab.
Don't want it. Don't want it. I do it purposely to wind you up.
I'm also abusive to books, so I'm with you.
We're winning. We're winning, Kate.
I'm in the minority. I'm always in the minority. Every author we've got on is folding down pages and doesn't know what a bookmark is. It's driving me mad.
Lydia, please.
Sorry, I get off my soapbox.
We can't start you off. So I was talking before about how much I love reading about sisters, but actually, like, what is like catnip to me and Lyd is reading about mother-daughter dynamics. Like, there is nothing better just to get stuck into that. And this was just one of my favourite mother-daughter relationships that I've ever read. It was so great. And are you okay with me reading your book back to you?
Yeah, sure.
I would have been really upset if you'd have said no.
You've done it anyway.
Okay, Kate.
Kate question. Would have edited out the no.
Oh no. Okay, so there are a couple of moments that I felt were the perfect way to articulate a mother-daughter dynamic, in my humble opinion. And if I spoil anything within these quotes, we can edit them out, but I'm hoping that I can get away with them. So we'll see. So the first bit is they're having a bit of a tiff. Every time I try to talk to her about Dad's one-man cold case investigation, she shuts it down. Maybe he loved you all more, eh? Mum said the last time I brought it up. Maybe I should have kept at it. Maybe I should never have stopped looking for your sister and left you to feed yourself then. Is that it? Not the implication, I said. This doesn't need to be so difficult. I'm just cleaning everything up. I'm difficult, she said. He goes off a bridge, but I'm difficult. Thank you for not driving off a bridge, I said. Much appreciated. So there's that. And then I had 3 quotes, but that's ridiculous, so I'm going to do... So this one, I'm moving out, I say, and you're going to have to find a job. Wrap your head around those 2 facts. Mum looks like she's been slapped. Where would you have me work? I shrug. You'll think of something. Maybe you'll marry rich again. Mum buries her head in her arm and makes soft sobbing sounds. It never ends. The humiliation never ends. And I loved that so much. I was literally like cackling reading that. And then there was the moment that you spoke about before where she talks about only wanting to show this like perfect version of herself to her mum. And I think that, there are just so many different nuances and elements to a mother-daughter relationship that you just you showed every side of it, the ridiculousness of it, her mum like softly sobbing. I'm like, that's defo been my mum at some point. Like, my mum has done things like that where she just bursts into tears for the sake of it. And I'm like, why are you crying? Stop it. Like, you're just being so overdramatic. And it's like, if anybody else was listening to that conversation, they'd be like, Mum, shut up. They'd be like, Hannah, you're being so cruel, but you can be like that with your mum. Like, the ridiculousness of it just absolutely killed me. And what I wanted to ask is, did you know going into the novel that you were going to write about this mother-daughter dynamic in such detail?
Going in, I wanted to write a really healthy mother-daughter relationship because I had written a bunch of short stories. I know, it's crazy. And my first like kind of failed project that I talked about had this real villain of a mother who is this kind of abusive figure. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to challenge myself that there's so much kind of darkness in this book. The mom is going to be great. And so I knew a lot about Claire going into it. Like I knew her whole backstory and I loved her. And then of course, as like my husband made fun of me a lot for this too, because like as the novel progressed, that relationship got more and more kind of toxic. But I think it just felt more lived in. Like it was, I just had a sense of how they would talk to each other, and it couldn't be perfect. Like there's so much stress on them. And I think there's a lot of love there. And I love Claire as a character. And I think she's doing her best. In a lot of ways, she's doing better than everybody else in the book. But yeah, she, like everyone, has her blind spots. Like the idea of working to her is like, I would never, like, or like, they're weird about food. Like anytime Teddy eats something in front of her mother, she feels like slightly self-conscious about it. Not in a way that would ever rise to, there's something horrible happening here. Like it's not a major thing, but just little things like that where I thought about like, okay, well, what do these relationships feel like on the ground? Her mom might make a comment, like you're looking a little Zaftig. And she's like, you can't just call me fat. She's like, no, like, and that kind of passive aggressiveness that felt, yeah, maybe like how they would communicate. But no, I mean, I had thought they were going to have this like great, perfect relationship, and I'm incapable of writing such a thing.
I just think that the perfect mother-daughter relationship doesn't exist. Like
Yeah,
this perfect,
I was
healthy, like.
literally gonna say exactly the same thing. I was like, that is how I feel like the mothers I'm speaking to, the parents will probably understand this. But when you have your child, you're like, this is gonna be the best relationship ever. We're never gonna we're perfect for each other. And the baby gets a little bit older and you think, oh, it won't stop crying. And you get to a point where now I will speak to my daughter and she just gives me full sass back. And it's like talking to myself, which is terrifying. But it's that point where you think, oh, okay, well, you're a different person than me. And for so long, I thought you were just going to be me, but you're not. You're like me mixed with a load of other weird things.
Yeah.
And it's like, I feel like the way that you write their relationship has just such an authenticity to it. And it just feels so real and grounded in reality. And I think that when so much of Teddy's life is lived online and in kind of like this alternative reality, it's so good that when she is talking to her mum and she's in that environment with her mum, that she is kind of brought back down to the ground a little bit. And it is through the way that they speak to each other. And I thought that was just brilliantly done.
Thank
and
you.
that's all I've got to say on that.
No notes, Kate, no notes.
No notes, 10 out of 10.
Great.
So good. And I also just want to say that Lydia talking about her daughter there, like she's this whole grown person. She's 4 and she
No, yeah, but she is 4, but she's going on 40.
No, I
like
completely, my son is still like kind of worships the ground I walk on, but the way he and my husband talk to one another, it's like they're arch rivals sometimes. Like he said something the other day in front of my husband. He was like, don't you think daddy should try to be a little bit more significant? And I was like, what the hell? What does that mean?
Where has that come from?
I have no idea, honestly. He's crazy. But yeah, yeah, I think you think like, oh, I love this person so much. That will mean everything is easy, but it means the opposite. It means like there's so much intensity there, and it actually complicates it.
100%.
I want to read it for a third time.
Oh, here we go. Overachiever in the corner over there, piping up.
I just love it so much. I feel very attached to this book.
Oh,
I know
thank
you are. We know you are. One of the things that I want to ask you before we do let you go, unfortunately, is that the book is so intricate and interesting and filled with kind of these motifs. Particularly, I felt of like the horror genre, and that I kind of picked out as like a big horror fan myself, like you were saying about the doppelgangers and this kind of, you've always got this sense of unease throughout it, which I felt was brilliant. What are your kind of like literary influences?
I think a lot of that came out of, like I said, my teaching. So I was teaching a lot of 18th, 19th century British lit, a lot of Gothic literature, Americans too, like Poe and all the classics. And I think, Frankenstein is huge for me. I think when you're teaching something, you read it so carefully. It's kind of like, I'm sure your work, like prepping to talk about a book, you have to read it so much more closely. And so you become really attached to those texts. But also I think with film, I'm like a horror buff. Like I just love horror movies. So, and when I was writing the book, a lot of it was written on my first maternity leave. And I was in this like very strangely configured, it was a 1-bedroom apartment that we tried to make a 2-bedroom apartment in New York. So our living room was the hallway. And I just sat in there with the baby for like weeks, and it was just the two of us, and I watched horror movies like on my laptop, and there were no windows. And so it was a really strange environment. And I'd kind of like wake up, try to write a couple of pages of the book. We'd both kind of drift off to sleep, wake up. Like, so I think being in that headspace too, like that influenced parts of the book. And I love contemporary thrillers that feel like they're in that kind of horror space, like Antoine Wilson's Mouth to Mouth, or Katie Kitamura's Intimacies. B. Seton had a book that came out last year called Berlin. Like all those books, I think the horror is happening on the sentence level. Like the sentences are just vibrating with tension and unease. And that craft-wise is something I'm always on the lookout for, because it's so hard to replicate. Like those books specifically, like Mouth to Mouth, Berlin, Intimacies, there's not a dead body. There's no kind of splashy monsters. But that creeping sense that something is wrong is so built into the way the characters see the world and the things they're picking up on. So yeah, that is kind of like what I'm always chasing, I think, on a line level.
I'm really relieved that I've actually got one of those that you've listed. Because you're costing me a lot of money here, Kate.
Which one?
Berlin?
Oh, I love Berlin.
Yeah. And you're not borrowing it.
I was just about to say, can I borrow it?
When I finish here, you can. Kate, thank you so much for coming on a pair of bookends. I am so sorry at our ridiculous ways, but also this is what you sign up for when you come on the podcast. So
This is so fun.
before we let you go, although I've already got some recommendations, we have to finish on recommendations. So have you got any for us?
I haven't read it yet, but I heard Gabrielle Korn read at a series in LA called Empty Trash. I love this reading series because the premise is writers come and they read from things they've thrown away, like their discarded work.
Love that.
Wow.
It was fun. And her trash was really great. So she just wrote Yours for the Taking, which I got at the series because I was like, this is going to be really good. And it's set in like 2050 in this kind of futuristic universe. And yeah, so I'm looking forward to that one. I also am finally getting into Larry McMurtry because everyone has been recommending. It's just like a classic blind spot for me. So I got Leaving Cheyenne and Lonesome Dove, and I'm starting with Leaving Cheyenne. So that's what I'm on now. And then I don't know, the book I always recommend if you love sister stuff, which I think everyone has read this book, but All My Puny Sorrows is like,
I haven't read it.
oh my God.
Oh my gosh. Do you know what? I think, did Meg Howry recommend this?
Yeah.
Yes. Oh, it's
Yeah.
second time, so it means I've got to buy it.
It does.
So,
I love that
it's a perfect book.
justification.
But that's about sisters.
Yes, it's about these two sisters, Yoli and Elfie. And Elf is this like concert pianist who is clinically depressed and wants to die. And she keeps trying to take her own life. And Yoli is like trying to stop her, basically. And it does not sound funny. It does not sound, but it is very funny. And it's the best. Like it is so good and just like gorgeously written. And yeah, like if you need like a good cry, I would say it's not dark. It's like very, it is obviously because depression and suicide, but it's not like cynical. It's very sweet. And it really does like get that like love between sisters really right.
Legitimately, you should have seen the look that me and Hannah just had. Like, it's ticking the boxes. Like, misery.
Sold.
Like, Yes, please.
No, but I felt really awful because I was in the, like, I got quite hyper during this. I don't know why. I got quite hyper during this recording. I got really excited for this recommendation. I was like really cheesy smiling, and then I clocked myself doing this really cheesy smile while she was talking about suicide and depression, and I was like, Hannah, wipe that smile off your face. What are you doing?
But once again, if you don't laugh, you'll cry. So why not laugh?
That's fair, yeah, that's true. Kate, thank you so much for coming on a pair of bookends. And for our listeners, Rabbit Hole is out now. Go get your copies for our American and UK listeners. You can all get yourselves copies, so you know it's like a free for all now. Stunning. I'm very jealous for everyone that's going to read it for the first time. I might have to go and read it for a third and fourth.
Oh, it can't
I'm very attached to this book. It's actually.
I know you are.
So thank you, Kate, for writing it. But where can our listeners find you on social media?
So I am at Kate Brody Author on Instagram and Twitter. And yeah, Instagram is probably my most updated one.
And I had a quick scan through before of your Instagram, and you do have a lot of good book recommendations on there. So I'm probably going to have to unfollow you because that's just going to be chaos for my bank account. You know, it's not.
But I'll try to keep it to a minimum.
Please don't. Yeah, I don't want to let you go. Is that obvious?
It was so fun talking to you. Thank you so much for having me.
No, thank you. And listeners, if you want to give us a follow as well, you can do so at A Pair of Bookends Pod on Instagram and at A Pair of Bookends on Twitter and TikTok. Thank you so much for listening, and goodbye.
Thank you.